Hanging upside down from the ancient oak with blood rushing to her head, 78-year-old Martha Harrington stared in disbelief as the massive chestnut horse emerged from the misty forest and studied her predicament with unnerving intelligence. Thunder's deliberate actions in the next heart-stopping moments would not only save her life, but challenge everything scientists thought possible about the bond between humans and animals. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The mist hung low over Willowbrook Forest that morning, wrapping the ancient trees in a silvery shroud. Martha Harrington had lived on the edge of these woods for over 60 years, and at 78, she knew every path and clearing as intimately as the wrinkles on her weathered hands. The forest had been her sanctuary, her confidant, and now, as she grew older, it remained the one place where she still felt truly alive. Martha's children worried about her solitary walks. "Mom, you shouldn't go alone," her daughter would say during their weekly phone calls. "What if something happens? What if you fall?" But Martha would just chuckle and remind her that she'd been walking these woods since before her daughter was born. Besides, she wasn't completely alone. The forest was full of life, and she knew its inhabitants well. That morning, Martha had woken before dawn with a sense of purpose. Her arthritis was giving her a reprieve, and the weather report promised a beautiful autumn day. She'd packed a small bag with her sketchbook, a thermos of tea, and a few homemade oatmeal cookies. Drawing had become her passion in recent years, and there was a particular old oak tree she wanted to capture, a magnificent giant with gnarled branches that seemed to tell stories of centuries past. Not far from Martha's cottage, in a sprawling meadow that bordered the eastern edge of the forest, lived a chestnut horse named Thunder. He wasn't just any horse. He was special, perceptive in ways that made the locals whisper about him having the sight. Thunder belonged to the Wilson family, but everyone knew he was more of a free spirit than a possession. He roamed the meadow and forest edges with a liberty most horses never knew, always returning to his stable when night fell. Thunder had developed a curious relationship with Martha over the years. Sometimes when she walked near his meadow, he would trot alongside the fence line, keeping pace with her until she disappeared into the trees. Martha would talk to him, sharing thoughts she rarely voiced to humans. "You're a good listener, Thunder," she'd say, offering him an apple or carrot. "Better than most people." On this particular morning, Thunder watched from a distance as Martha entered the forest, her pace slower than in years past, but still determined. Something about her silhouette against the morning mist made him restless. He pawed at the ground, nickering softly as she vanished among the trees. Martha walked deeper into the forest, following the winding path that led to her favorite oak. The mist was beginning to lift, allowing shafts of golden sunlight to pierce through the canopy. She breathed deeply, savoring the earthy scent of damp leaves and moss. This was living, she thought, not the sterile safety her children wanted for her. The massive oak came into view, and Martha smiled at the sight. Its lower branches spread outward like welcoming arms, while the higher ones reached toward the heavens. At its base, exposed roots created natural seating areas, perfect for an elderly artist to settle in for a morning of sketching. But Martha had a different idea today. For weeks, she'd been eyeing a particular branch that extended horizontally, about 7 feet up. From that vantage point, she could capture an entirely new perspective of the forest, looking outward rather than upward. She'd brought a lightweight rope ladder she'd found in her late husband's workshop, determined to climb up just this once. "Age is just a number," she muttered to herself as she secured the ladder to the thick branch. She tested it with a firm tug. "Jim always made things to last," she said, thinking of her husband who had passed 5 years earlier. The ladder held firm, and Martha began her ascent with careful, deliberate movements. The climb was more taxing than she'd anticipated. By the time she reached the branch, her arms trembled with exertion and her breath came in short gasps. But the view was worth every aching muscle. The forest spread out before her like a living tapestry, dappled with sunlight and morning mist. Martha carefully positioned herself on the branch, her back against the trunk, and opened her sketchbook. For an hour, she lost herself in the joy of creation, her pencil capturing the gentle sweep of the landscape. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the first signs of the branch's stress, the subtle creaking, the almost imperceptible shift beneath her. When she finally did register the sound, it was too late. With a sharp crack, the branch gave way. Martha let out a startled cry as she tumbled backward. In a moment of desperate instinct, she grabbed for anything within reach. Her foot caught in a loop of the rope ladder, and suddenly, the world turned upside down. The violent motion sent her sketchbook and bag plummeting to the forest floor. But Martha remained suspended, dangling upside down from her entangled foot. "Help!" she called out, her voice thin in the vast forest. "Anybody, please help!" But her cottage was too far for anyone to hear, and the walking path rarely saw visitors, especially this early. The blood rushed to her head as she hung there, 7 feet above the ground. Martha tried to reach up to free her foot, but decades of limited flexibility made the maneuver impossible. Her arms weren't strong enough to pull her body upward, and the more she struggled, the more securely the rope seemed to wrap around her ankle. Panic began to set in. Her heart hammered painfully in her chest, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. This was exactly the scenario her children had feared. Martha in danger, alone in the woods. "Foolish old woman," she chastised herself as tears of frustration welled in her eyes. As the minutes stretched into an hour, Martha's panic gave way to a strange calm. The forest continued its daily symphony around her. Birds called, leaves rustled, and somewhere in the distance water burbled over stones. If this was how it ended, at least she was in the place she loved most. She closed her eyes, conserving her strength, aware that hanging upside down was dangerous for someone her age. The pressure in her head was becoming unbearable. That's when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching through the underbrush. Martha opened her eyes, hardly daring to hope. Through her inverted view of the world, she saw a familiar chestnut form emerging from between the trees. "Thunder," she whispered, wondering if the blood rushing to her head was causing hallucinations. But it was indeed Thunder, his eyes wide and alert as he took in the bizarre scene before him. The horse had somehow escaped his meadow, following some instinct or sense that had led him directly to Martha. He approached cautiously, nostrils flaring as he assessed the situation. "Oh, Thunder," Martha said, her voice breaking with relief. "I never thought I'd be so happy to see anyone in my life." The horse circled the tree, examining Martha's predicament from all angles. He came close enough that she could feel his warm breath on her face. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. The upside-down elderly woman and the forest-wandering horse. It was a tableau so absurd that Martha couldn't help but laugh despite her dire situation. "I don't suppose you know how to dial 911, she joked weakly. Thunder snorted in response, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. Then, to Martha's astonishment, he did something that would change both their lives forever. What happened next was something nobody in Willowbrook would ever have believed, had they not witnessed its aftermath with their own eyes. Thunder stood perfectly still, his intelligent eyes fixed on Martha's upside-down form. Then, with a deliberate movement that seemed almost human in its intentionality, he approached the dangling rope ladder. Martha watched in disbelief as the horse gently took the loose end of the ladder between his teeth. With careful precision, he began to pull, creating tension in the rope that slightly lifted Martha's suspended body. "What are you doing?" Martha whispered, hardly daring to move for fear of startling the animal. Thunder continued pulling the rope, moving backward step by step. The gentle traction he created was changing the angle of Martha's suspension, slowly rotating her body until she could almost reach the trunk of the oak tree. It wasn't enough to free her, but it gave her something to grab onto, a momentary stability in her precarious position. "Clever boy," Martha said, her voice stronger now. Hope surged within her as she stretched her arms toward the rough bark of the tree. Her fingertips brushed against it, but she couldn't quite get a firm grip. "Just a little more, Thunder." As if understanding her words, Thunder adjusted his position and pulled with renewed purpose. Martha's body swung closer to the trunk, and this time her hands found purchase on a knotted section of bark. With trembling arms, she held tight, relieving some of the pressure on her trapped ankle. "Good boy," she called to Thunder, who maintained the tension on the rope, his muscular body braced against the pull. "Now I just need to figure out how to get down from here." The horse released the rope momentarily, causing Martha to gasp as she swung slightly away from the tree. But before panic could take hold, Thunder had circled around and was nudging at her suspended shoulders with his muzzle, pushing her back toward the trunk. Martha's mind raced. Thunder couldn't free her foot from the tangled rope. That would require human hands and possibly tools. But he was giving her a fighting chance, preventing her from hanging helplessly until exhaustion or the physical stress of being inverted took its toll. "I need someone with thumbs, Thunder," Martha said, thinking aloud. "Someone who can untie knots." Thunder nickered softly, as if in agreement. Then, to Martha's amazement, he lowered his broad back directly beneath her upper body. He stood perfectly still, positioning himself so that her outstretched hands could reach his mane. "Are you offering me a ride?" Martha asked incredulously. The horse remained steady, waiting. Martha understood then. If she could grab onto Thunder's mane and support her weight, the pressure on her trapped ankle might lessen enough for her to work it free. It was a wild idea, the kind that only desperation could make seem reasonable. "I'm too old for such acrobatics," she muttered, but she had few alternatives. With a deep breath, Martha reached for Thunder's mane, her fingers threading through the coarse hair. She gripped as tightly as she dared without hurting him. "I'm sorry if this pulls, friend." Using what strength remained in her arms, Martha tried to pull herself toward Thunder's back. The movement sent waves of pain through her twisted ankle and strained shoulders, but she persisted. Thunder stood as solid as bedrock beneath her, adjusting his stance slightly to accommodate her movements. Martha's upper body was now draped awkwardly across Thunder's back, while her leg remained caught in the rope ladder above. The new position was uncomfortable but allowed blood to flow away from her head, bringing immediate relief from the pounding pressure that had been building there. "Now what?" she wondered aloud. The answer came when Thunder began to move, taking small, careful steps forward. The motion created a changing tension on the rope, and Martha felt her ankle shift within its binding. "Wait, that's it. Keep moving just a little." Thunder seemed to understand. He continued his gentle movement forward and back, side to side, creating different angles of tension. Martha worked with the shifting pressure, twisting her foot whenever she felt the rope loosen slightly. After several minutes of this strange dance, she felt the binding begin to give. "It's working," she exclaimed, reinvigorated by the prospect of freedom. "Just a bit more." With one final coordinated effort, Thunder moving forward as Martha twisted her ankle, her foot slipped free. The sudden release sent her tumbling fully onto Thunder's back, where she lay sprawled and ungraceful but no longer suspended upside down. "We did it," Martha gasped, her voice breaking with relief and exhaustion. "You brilliant, beautiful creature." Thunder stood patiently as Martha gradually righted herself on his back. She hadn't ridden a horse in decades, and her body protested every movement. But compared to hanging upside down from a tree, sitting astride Thunder's broad back felt like the height of comfort. "I don't suppose you'd mind giving an old woman a ride home?" Martha asked, stroking his neck gratefully. In answer, Thunder began walking carefully through the forest, picking his way along the path with a smoothness that suggested he was consciously trying not to jostle his elderly passenger. Martha clung to his mane, her heart full of wonder at the morning's extraordinary events. As they emerged from the dense trees into a clearing, Martha caught sight of a figure in the distance. James Peterson, her nearest neighbor, out for his morning hike with his dog. The elderly man stopped in his tracks, his mouth falling open at the sight before him. "Martha Harrington, is that you?" he called, hurrying toward them. "Riding bareback through the woods at your age?" Martha laughed, the sound bright and clear in the morning air. "It's quite a story, James. I don't think you'll believe it." James approached cautiously, eyeing Thunder with respect. "Isn't this the Wilson horse? The one they say is smarter than most people?" "Smarter than me, certainly," Martha replied, patting Thunder's neck. "He saved my life today." James helped Martha carefully dismount, supporting her as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. She winced as her weight settled on her injured ankle. "I'll need to have this looked at," she admitted, gesturing to the angry red marks where the rope had bound her. "What happened out there?" James asked, his weathered face creased with concern. Martha glanced at Thunder, who stood nearby, watching them with those intelligent eyes that seemed to hold secrets of their own. "Would you believe me if I told you I was hanging upside down from a tree, and this horse figured out how to rescue me?" James looked from Martha to Thunder and back again. "From anyone else, I'd say that's the tallest tale I've heard since my grandfather's fishing stories, but from you, Martha," he shook his head in wonder, "well, if anyone was going to be rescued by a horse, it would be you." Martha smiled, reaching out to stroke Thunder's velvety muzzle. "He's no ordinary horse, James. He knew exactly what to do, almost like he understood what I needed. The Wilsons always said there was something special about him," James acknowledged. "But this is something else entirely." Thunder nickered softly, nudging Martha's hand as if seeking approval. The connection between them was palpable, a bond forged in crisis and mutual trust. "Let's get you home and call the doctor," James said, offering his arm for support. "And the Wilsons too. They'll want to know their horse is a hero." Martha nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of her ordeal as exhaustion swept over her. But as they began the slow walk back to her cottage, Thunder following unprompted behind them, she couldn't help but smile. At 78 years old, she had experienced something magical in these woods, something that would change her perspective forever. Word of Martha's extraordinary rescue spread through Willowbrook with the speed and enthusiasm that only small-town news can generate. By the time Dr. Eleanor Benson had finished wrapping Martha's sprained ankle and prescribing rest, 3 neighbors had already stopped by with casseroles and barely contained curiosity. "It's just a mild sprain," Dr. Benson assured Martha, who sat in her floral armchair with her leg propped up on a footstool. "Though I still can't quite believe how you managed to get yourself down from that tree." The doctor glanced through the window where Thunder still stood in Martha's front yard, grazing contentedly as if nothing unusual had transpired. "I wouldn't have, without him," Martha said, her eyes following the doctor's gaze. "I know it sounds absurd, a horse coming to my rescue like something out of a children's book, but that's exactly what happened." Dr. Benson smiled kindly. She had known Martha for decades and had never known her to exaggerate or fabricate stories. "The mind is a powerful thing, Martha. In times of crisis, we sometimes see patterns or intentions that help us survive." "This wasn't my imagination, Eleanor," Martha said firmly. That horse knew exactly what he was doing. The doctor patted Martha's hand. Either way, you're lucky. A woman your age, hanging upside down for that long. The outcome could have been much worse. After the doctor left, Sarah Wilson arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. The 40-something horse owner rushed in without knocking, a habit from years of friendly visits. "Martha, James Peterson called us about Thunder," she exclaimed, settling into the chair opposite Martha. "Is it true? Did he really find you hanging from a tree?" Martha recounted the morning's events while Sarah listened with increasing amazement. "I've always known Thunder was special," Sarah said when Martha finished. "He's been with us for 12 years and he's always shown an unusual awareness, but this..." She shook her head in wonder. "This is something else entirely." "He saved my life," Martha said simply. "I don't know how he knew I was in trouble, or how he understood what to do, but he did." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Thunder has always had a soft spot for you, Martha. Remember when you used to bring him those homemade horse treats? He'd recognize your car from across the field and come running before you even got out." "He remembers kindness," Martha replied, smiling at the memory. "Well, he certainly won't be forgotten around here," Sarah said. "The whole town's talking about it. Thunder, the hero horse of Willowbrook. My kids are beside themselves with excitement." Martha gazed out the window at the chestnut horse. "Will you take him home now?" Sarah followed her gaze, noting the strange connection that seemed to exist between the elderly woman and her horse. "Actually, I was thinking, would you mind if he stayed here tonight? He seems content, and it might be good for you to have some company after your ordeal." Martha's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." After Sarah left, promising to return with hay and feed, Martha hobbled to the porch with the aid of a cane. Thunder raised his head as she appeared, his ears perked forward attentively. "Looks like you're staying the night," Martha called to him. "I hope you don't mind the accommodations. Not as spacious as your meadow, I'm afraid." Thunder nickered softly and approached the porch steps. Martha lowered herself carefully onto the top step, wincing as she adjusted her bandaged ankle. The horse came close enough that she could reach out and stroke his velvet nose. "Thank you," she whispered, looking into his deep brown eyes. "I don't know how you found me or how you knew what to do, but thank you." That evening, after Sarah had returned with supplies and helped set up a makeshift shelter in the yard, Martha sat by her bedroom window watching Thunder in the moonlight. The horse stood sentinel-like, occasionally turning his head toward the house as if checking on her. Martha felt a profound sense of connection that transcended the usual relationship between human and animal. Her phone rang, disturbing her reverie. It was her daughter, Kate, calling for their weekly check-in. "Mom, are you all right? Mrs. Jenkins from next door called me about some accident in the woods." Martha sighed. She'd hoped to tell Kate about the incident herself in her own way. "I'm fine, dear. Just a little mishap while I was out sketching." "She said you were hanging upside down from a tree and got rescued by a horse. What were you thinking, climbing trees at your age?" Martha bristled at her daughter's tone. "I was thinking that I'm still alive, Kate, and I'd like to stay that way. Truly alive, not just breathing." A heavy silence followed. Then Kate's voice softened. "I worry about you, Mom, living out there alone, taking these risks." "I understand your concern," Martha replied, watching Thunder's silhouette in the yard. "But today showed me something important. Yes, there are risks to living the way I do, but there are also wonders. Things you would never believe if I told you." "Like being rescued by a horse?" Kate asked, her skepticism evident even through the phone. "Exactly like that," Martha confirmed. "His name is Thunder and he's staying in my yard tonight." Another pause. "Mom, are you sure you didn't hit your head when you fell?" Martha laughed. "I'm perfectly lucid, thank you. In fact, I've never felt more clear-headed. Sometimes the most unbelievable things are true, Kate. You might discover that yourself if you took a few more risks." After they hung up, Martha returned her gaze to Thunder. The conversation with Kate had crystallized something in her mind. For years, her children had been urging her to move to a retirement community, to give up her solitary life in the cottage by the woods. They saw only the dangers, the isolation, the potential for disaster. But they missed everything else: the beauty, the freedom, and yes, even the magic that could be found in a life lived on one's own terms. Today's near tragedy had paradoxically strengthened Martha's resolve to maintain her independence. If she had been living in a sterile apartment in town, she would never have experienced the extraordinary connection that now linked her to Thunder. She would never have known that such things were possible. As if sensing her thoughts, Thunder raised his head and looked directly at her window. Martha smiled and raised her hand in a small wave. The horse bobbed his head once, as if in acknowledgement, before returning to his grazing. Martha settled back in her chair, feeling a contentment that went beyond the simple relief of survival. Tomorrow would bring more visitors, more questions, more well-meaning concerns about her living situation. But tonight, under the watchful eye of her unlikely guardian, Martha felt more certain than ever that she was exactly where she belonged. Martha woke the next morning to the gentle sound of Thunder's nickering outside her window. For a disorienting moment, she wondered why a horse would be in her yard, before the memories of the previous day came flooding back. The terror of hanging upside down, the miraculous rescue, the parade of concerned visitors. It all returned with startling clarity. She pushed herself up and reached for her cane, wincing as her body reminded her of yesterday's ordeal. Every muscle protested, but her ankle felt surprisingly better. Hobbling to the window, she peered out to see Thunder standing alert, his ears perked forward as he gazed at her cottage. When he spotted her at the window, he tossed his head in what seemed like greeting. "Good morning to you too," Martha called softly, smiling despite her discomfort. "I suppose you're hungry." As if in answer, Thunder pawed at the ground once, then turned his attention to the small pile of hay Sarah had left the evening before. Martha chuckled. Talking to animals was nothing new for her, but having one respond with such apparent comprehension was an experience she was still adjusting to. After a simple breakfast and a careful shower, Martha made her way to the porch with a mug of steaming tea. Thunder immediately approached, his movements deliberate and gentle as he came to stand near the steps. "We made quite a stir, didn't we?" Martha said, sipping her tea. "I suspect we'll have more visitors today. People love a good story, especially one with a happy ending." As if on cue, a car pulled into Martha's gravel driveway. She recognized it immediately. The sleek black sedan belonged to Robert Harrington, her son. Martha sighed. Kate must have called him after their conversation. Robert emerged from the car, his city clothes and polished appearance contrasting sharply with the rustic surroundings of Martha's cottage. At 48, he was the elder of her two children and the more forceful in his opinions about her living situation. "Mom," he called, his face tight with concern as he approached the porch. His eyes darted to Thunder, who stood his ground watching the newcomer with interest. "What's this horse doing here? And what's this about you hanging from a tree?" Martha set down her mug. "Good morning to you too, Robert. This is Thunder. He saved my life yesterday." Robert looked from his mother to the horse and back again, disbelief evident in his expression. "Kate told me some wild story, but I thought she must have misunderstood. Are you saying you actually were suspended upside down from a tree branch?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Martha replied calmly. "I was sketching from a higher vantage point. The branch gave way. My foot got caught in my rope ladder, and there I was, upside down and helpless." Robert ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture Martha recognized as a sign of his mounting frustration. "And you expect me to believe this horse somehow rescued you? That's unbelievable, I know," Martha finished for him. "And yet it happened exactly that way." Robert narrowed his eyes, studying his mother's face for signs of confusion or delusion. Finding none, he turned his attention to Thunder, who had moved closer to Martha, as if positioning himself protectively. "The Wilson horse," Robert murmured, recognition dawning. "I remember him from my last visit. But Mom, horses don't just rescue people. They don't understand complex problems like someone being trapped." "Most horses don't," Martha agreed, reaching out to stroke Thunder's neck. "But Thunder isn't most horses." Robert sighed heavily and climbed the porch steps, settling into the chair beside his mother. "Look, Mom, I know you love your independence. I respect that. But this incident just proves what Kate and I have been saying all along. It's not safe for you to be out here alone." Martha had been expecting this argument. "And yet, if I'd been living in that retirement community you're so fond of, I would never have experienced something truly extraordinary. I would never have known that animals like Thunder exist, creatures with intelligence and empathy beyond what we give them credit for." "Mom—" "No, Robert, listen to me," Martha interrupted, her voice firm. "Yesterday was frightening. Yes, I made a mistake climbing that tree at my age, but the experience also showed me something wonderful about the world, something I wouldn't trade." Robert's expression softened slightly. He had always admired his mother's spirit, even when it frustrated him. "I just worry about you out here. What if something happens and there's no miraculous horse to save you next time?" Martha reached over and patted her son's hand. "Life offers no guarantees, Robert. Not at my age, not at yours. The question is what makes a life worth living in the first place. For me, it's this: my home, my forest, my freedom to make my own choices, even the occasional bad one." Thunder nickered softly, drawing both their attentions. The horse had moved to stand directly in front of the porch steps, his intelligent eyes fixed on Robert as if assessing him. "He really does seem to understand what we're saying," Robert said, a note of wonder creeping into his voice despite his skepticism. "He does," Martha confirmed. "Why don't you go say hello? He won't bite." Robert hesitated, then stood and descended the steps. He approached Thunder cautiously, one hand extended. The horse remained still, allowing Robert to come close. When he gently touched Thunder's neck, the horse leaned slightly into the contact, causing Robert to smile involuntarily. "He's remarkable," Robert admitted, stroking the horse's sleek coat. "Yes, he is," Martha agreed, "and my life is richer for knowing him." Robert continued petting Thunder, his expression thoughtful. After a moment, he turned back to his mother. "I still think you should consider moving somewhere safer, Mom, but I understand why this place means so much to you." Martha nodded, acknowledging the small concession. "Thank you, Robert. That's all I ask, that you try to understand." The tension between them eased, and they spent the next hour in surprisingly pleasant conversation. Robert shared news of his children, and Martha told him more details about her rescue, embellishing nothing yet still leaving her son shaking his head in amazement. When Robert finally prepared to leave, he paused by his car and looked back at the tableau of his elderly mother and the chestnut horse, who had returned to stand near her chair like a faithful guardian. "Take care of her," he said to Thunder, only half joking. Thunder bobbed his head once, a gesture so deliberate that Robert blinked in surprise. He glanced at his mother, who smiled knowingly. "Told you," she said simply. As Robert's car disappeared down the lane, Martha turned to Thunder. "Thank you for being on your best behavior. He means well, even if he doesn't always understand." Thunder gently nudged her shoulder with his muzzle, nearly causing Martha to lose her balance. She laughed, steadying herself on his strong neck. You and I understand each other, though, don't we? She murmured, looking into those deep, knowing eyes. And that's a rare gift indeed. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Sarah Wilson had agreed to let Thunder stay with Martha while she recovered, an arrangement that seemed to please the horse as much as it did Martha. Each morning, Martha would wake to find Thunder alert and waiting, his eyes tracking her movements through the windows of the cottage. Each evening, she would sit on the porch sharing the events of her day with her equine companion, who listened with what she could only describe as genuine interest. By the third day, Martha's ankle had improved enough that she could walk short distances without her cane. That afternoon, she ventured into the yard where Thunder greeted her with a gentle nudge of his muzzle against her shoulder. "I think I'm ready for a short walk," Martha told him, running her hand along his gleaming coat. "Nothing ambitious, just down to the mailbox and back. Care to join me?" Thunder's ears perked forward, and he shifted his weight expectantly. Martha took that as agreement and began her careful journey down the gravel path that led to the main road. Thunder walked beside her, matching his pace to her halting steps. Every few moments he would stop when she paused to rest, never rushing ahead, never falling behind. When they reached the mailbox, Martha leaned against it, breathing a bit heavily from the exertion. Not bad for an old lady who was hanging upside down from a tree a few days ago, wouldn't you say? Thunder nickered softly, bobbing his head in what Martha had come to recognize as his way of agreeing. She laughed, reaching out to stroke his neck. "You're good for my ego, you know that?" As they stood there in the autumn sunshine, a blue pickup truck slowed on the road. Martha recognized Stanley Green, the editor of the Willowbrook Gazette, the town's small weekly newspaper. He pulled over and rolled down his window. "Well, if it isn't the talk of the town and her four-legged hero," Stanley called out, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "How are you feeling, Martha?" "Much better, thank you," Martha replied. "Just getting some fresh air with my new friend here." Stanley's eyes gleamed with journalistic interest. "You know, people can't stop talking about what happened. A horse rescuing someone like that, it's the kind of story that doesn't come along every day in Willowbrook." Martha nodded, knowing where this was heading. "I suppose you'd like to write about it for the Gazette." "If you wouldn't mind," Stanley confirmed, already reaching for the notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. "It would make a wonderful front-page feature. Local horse saves elderly woman in daring rescue. Or something catchier. I'll work on the headline." Martha considered the request. She was a private person by nature, but there was something about this experience that felt meant to be shared. "All right, Stanley, but on one condition. No portraying me as some helpless old woman. I made a mistake climbing that tree, but I've been taking care of myself in these woods for decades." Stanley chuckled. "Fair enough. How about we do the interview tomorrow? Say, around 10. I'd like to get some photos too, if that's okay. You and Thunder together." Martha glanced at the horse, who was watching the exchange with his characteristic attentiveness. "What do you think, Thunder? Ready for your 15 minutes of fame?" Thunder snorted and pawed at the ground once. "I think that's a yes," Martha translated, turning back to Stanley with a smile. "Tomorrow at 10 will be fine." After Stanley drove away, Martha and Thunder made their slow journey back to the cottage. "I hope you don't mind being in the spotlight," she told the horse, "though something tells me you're not the type to get camera shy." That evening, as twilight settled over the forest, Martha sat on her porch with a sketch pad balanced on her lap. Her fingers moved over the paper with practiced ease, capturing Thunder's elegant form as he grazed in the yard. The artistic impulse that had led her up that ill-fated tree had returned, but now she was content to draw from a safer vantage point. As darkness fell, Martha reluctantly prepared to head inside. "Good night, Thunder," she called to the horse. "I'll see you in the morning." Thunder raised his head and watched as she made her way to the door. Just as Martha was about to step inside, a distant howl echoed from the forest edge. Thunder's ears pricked forward, his body suddenly tense and alert. Martha paused, listening. "Just a coyote," she assured him. "They stay away from the house." But Thunder seemed unconvinced. Instead of returning to his grazing, he moved deliberately to position himself directly in front of Martha's porch, facing the direction of the howl. His stance was protective, his attention fixed on the darkening tree line. "Are you standing guard?" Martha asked, both touched and amused by his apparent concern. Thunder remained steadfast, unmoved by her gentle teasing. Martha watched him for a moment, then shrugged and went inside. Through her window, she could see his silhouette, vigilant and unwavering in the yard. It was a strangely comforting sight. Morning brought Stanley Green as promised, his camera equipment slung over his shoulder and his notebook at the ready. Thunder, who had apparently maintained his protective position for much of the night, now stood placidly in the yard, seemingly enjoying the attention as Stanley snapped photos. "So take me through exactly what happened," Stanley prompted, settling into a chair across from Martha on the porch. "Start from the beginning. Why were you climbing a tree at 78? Martha recounted the story in detail, describing her artistic ambitions, the moment the branch gave way, and the terrifying experience of hanging upside down with no help in sight. When she reached the part about Thunder's arrival and ingenious rescue, Stanley's pen flew across the page, his eyes wide with fascination. "And you're certain you didn't call out to him? Signal him somehow?" Stanley asked. "How could I?" Martha replied. "The Wilsons' property is over a mile away. There's no way he could have heard me, even if I'd been screaming at the top of my lungs, which I wasn't. I was trying to conserve my energy." "So how did he know you were in trouble?" Martha glanced at Thunder, who had moved closer to listen to their conversation. "That's the mystery, isn't it? All I know is that when I needed help most, he appeared. And not only did he find me, but he understood exactly what to do." Stanley's gaze followed Martha's to the horse. "It's almost as if he sensed it somehow," Martha finished. "I know it sounds impossible, but then, so does the idea of a horse figuring out how to help someone get down from a tree. Yet here we are." Stanley nodded slowly, looking from Martha to Thunder with newfound respect. "This is going to be quite a story." "Yes," Martha agreed, reaching out to stroke Thunder's velvety muzzle as he approached the porch. "One I'm still trying to understand myself." The Willowbrook Gazette hit doorsteps and store counters the following Thursday, and Martha's phone hadn't stopped ringing since. Stanley's article, titled "A Bond Beyond Understanding: How Thunder the Horse Saved Martha Harrington," occupied the entire front page, complete with a photograph of Martha and Thunder sitting together in the autumn sunshine. The story had captured the imagination of everyone in town, and thanks to the internet, was beginning to spread beyond Willowbrook's boundaries. "This is getting ridiculous," Martha muttered as she hung up after the fifth call that morning. This time it had been a producer from a regional television station, asking if Martha would be willing to appear on their morning show. She had politely declined, as she had with the previous requests. Thunder, who was watching her through the open window, nickered softly. "You understand, don't you?" Martha said, limping to the window. "I didn't share our story for attention. I just thought people might find it meaningful somehow." Thunder bobbed his head, his eyes meeting hers with that unnerving intelligence that still gave Martha goosebumps at times. "Besides," she continued, "Sarah will be coming to take you home this afternoon. Your vacation with the crazy old lady is coming to an end." At the mention of leaving, Thunder's ears flattened slightly against his head. Martha had begun to recognize this as a sign of displeasure or concern. "Oh, don't look at me like that," Martha chided gently. You've been wonderful company, but you have a proper home with the Wilsons. I'm sure their children miss you terribly." Thunder snorted, pawing at the ground once. Martha smiled despite the pang of sadness she felt at the thought of his departure. "I'll miss you too, you know. But I'll come visit you in the meadow, just like I used to. I promise." Just then, Martha's phone rang again. With a sigh, she turned away from the window to answer it. This time it was Sarah Wilson. "Martha, I'm afraid I've got some news," Sarah began, her voice tense. "Is Thunder still behaving himself?" "He's been a perfect gentleman," Martha assured her. "Is everything all right? I thought you were coming to pick him up this afternoon." There was a pause on the line. "That's just it. I'm not sure if we should move him yet. Some reporters showed up at our place this morning. They parked their van right at the edge of our property and have been setting up cameras trying to get footage of the meadow where Thunder usually stays." Martha frowned. "Reporters? From where?" "Some national morning show, apparently. Stanley's article got picked up online, and now they're calling it the Miracle Horse of Willowbrook. They want to film Thunder in his natural environment, whatever that means." "That's absurd," Martha said, her irritation rising. "Can't you ask them to leave?" "Mike did," Sarah replied, referring to her husband. "They moved off our property but said they have every right to film from the public road. They're just waiting for Thunder to return." Martha glanced out at Thunder, who seemed to be listening to her conversation with keen interest. "So what are you suggesting? Would it be possible for Thunder to stay with you a few more days? Just until this dies down a bit? I hate to impose, especially with your ankle." "It's no imposition," Martha interrupted. "Thunder has been good company and my ankle is much better. He's welcome to stay as long as needed." The relief in Sarah's voice was evident. "Thank you, Martha. I'll bring over more feed and supplies this evening after dark when there's less chance of being followed." After hanging up, Martha returned to the window. "Looks like you're stuck with me a bit longer," she told Thunder. "We've got reporters on the prowl." Thunder's ears perked up, and he made a soft nickering sound that Martha had come to associate with contentment. "Don't look so pleased," she scolded with mock severity. "I know you're just staying for my apple cinnamon oatmeal cookies." Throughout the day, Martha fielded more calls, growing increasingly adept at polite but firm refusals. By late afternoon, she had disconnected her landline and was ignoring her rarely used cell phone. "Peace and quiet at last," she declared, settling into her porch chair with a book. Thunder grazed nearby, occasionally raising his head to scan the surrounding area, as if on alert. The protective behavior that Martha had noticed earlier seemed to have intensified since Sarah's call. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, Martha found herself reflecting on the unexpected turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been just another elderly woman living alone on the edge of a forest. Now she was harboring a miracle horse while dodging media attention. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent decades cultivating her privacy, appreciating the quiet rhythms of solitary life. Yet now, when the world seemed determined to intrude, she found herself strangely unperturbed. Perhaps it was the comfort of Thunder's presence, or perhaps it was the realization that her life still held the capacity for surprise and wonder. Her musings were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Martha tensed, expecting to see a news van, but instead recognized Sarah's blue pickup truck approaching slowly with its headlights off. Thunder raised his head, ears forward, but remained calm as the vehicle came to a stop. Sarah emerged from the truck, followed by her 10-year-old daughter Lily, who immediately ran toward Thunder with an excited squeal. "Thunder, we missed you," Lily exclaimed, throwing her arms around the horse's neck. Thunder lowered his head gently, allowing the child's embrace with remarkable patience. Sarah approached the porch carrying a large bag of feed. "Thank you again for doing this, Martha. It's absolute madness at our place." "It's no trouble," Martha assured her, watching the tender interaction between Lily and Thunder. "We've developed quite a routine already." "I can see that," Sarah said, setting down the feed bag. "He looks content here. More settled than I would have expected, actually. Thunder can be quite particular about his surroundings." Martha smiled. "We understand each other." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've always believed animals can sense things about people that we humans miss. Maybe Thunder knew, even before all this happened, that you two were meant to connect somehow." "Perhaps," Martha agreed, "though I could have done without the hanging upside down from a tree part of the introduction." They both laughed, the sound carrying in the still evening air. Lily was now showing Thunder a drawing she had made, holding up the paper, as if the horse could appreciate her artistic efforts. Remarkably, Thunder seemed to be examining the child's artwork with genuine interest, his eyes following her excited pointing. "Mom says you're famous now," Lily called to Martha. "She says people want to put you and Thunder on TV." Martha grimaced. "I'm afraid fame doesn't interest me much, Lily. I prefer my quiet life." "But don't you want everyone to know how special Thunder is?" the child asked, her expression earnest. Martha considered the question, looking at the magnificent animal who had so unexpectedly changed her life. "I think the people who truly need to know already do," she said softly. After Sarah and Lily left, darkness settled fully over Martha's cottage. The evening air carried a hint of coming frost, and Thunder seemed restless, pacing the perimeter of the yard with an alertness that caught Martha's attention. "What's troubling you?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched him from the porch. Thunder paused his patrol to look at her, then turned his gaze toward the road, ears perked forward. Martha listened intently, but heard nothing unusual, just the familiar symphony of the forest at night. "I don't hear anything," she told him. "But I trust your instincts more than mine these days." No sooner had she spoken than the distant rumble of engines broke the silence. Thunder's posture stiffened as headlights appeared around the bend in the road, illuminating the trees in harsh white light. Not one vehicle, but three, a news van followed by two cars, all moving slowly, as if searching for something. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Martha muttered, quickly retreating into her cottage and dousing the porch light. Through the window, she watched the small convoy pause at her driveway. A beam of light, a flashlight, or perhaps a camera light, swept across her property. Thunder had positioned himself in the shadows, beneath a large oak tree barely visible in the darkness. His stillness was remarkable. Even as the light passed near him, he remained motionless, a darker shadow among shadows. After what seemed an eternity, the vehicles moved on, continuing down the road. Martha released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They're looking for us," she said when Thunder approached the window. "Word must have gotten out that you're staying here." Thunder snorted softly, his breath fogging the cool glass. "This is absurd," Martha continued, more to herself than to the horse. "All this fuss over what? A story that most people don't even truly believe? But that wasn't entirely accurate, was it? There was something about their story that resonated with people, something about the idea of an animal understanding human distress and responding with intelligence and compassion. It challenged comfortable assumptions about the boundaries between species, about what animals know and feel. Perhaps that was why people were so captivated. Martha slept fitfully that night, waking several times to check on Thunder through her window. Each time, she found him standing vigilant, his attention fixed on the road, as if expecting the intruders to return. Morning brought a fresh challenge. Martha's landline had been reconnected overnight, and her first call of the day was from Mayor Billings himself. "Martha, good morning," the mayor began with practiced joviality. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all, Walter," Martha replied, having known the mayor since he was a boy running through these same woods. "What can I do for you?" "Well, it's about this horse situation," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "You've become quite the local celebrity, it seems." Martha sighed, hardly by choice. Of course," Mayor Billings agreed quickly. "But the thing is, Martha, this story is bringing attention to Willowbrook. Good attention. The kind that could really benefit the town economically." Martha felt a sinking sensation. "What exactly are you asking, Walter?" "The town council was thinking, and this is just an idea, mind you, that perhaps we could organize a small event. Nothing extravagant, just a little ceremony to honor you and, Thunder, is it? We could do it at the town square this weekend. The autumn festival is already happening, so people will be gathered anyway." "Walter," Martha began, trying to keep the edge from her voice, "Thunder isn't a circus act, and neither am I, for that matter." No, certainly not," the mayor backpedaled. "We're talking about a simple recognition ceremony, a key to the city, perhaps. Thunder could be the first animal to receive such an honor in Willowbrook history." Martha glanced out at Thunder, who was watching a pair of cardinals flit between the trees. There was a serenity about him that morning, a contentment that she was loath to disturb with public spectacles. "I appreciate the thought, Walter, but I'm afraid I must decline. Thunder and I prefer our privacy." There was a pause on the line. "Martha, I understand your reluctance, but please consider what this could mean for the town. Tourism, media coverage, perhaps even some donations for the restoration of the old community center. All from just a 15-minute appearance." Martha felt a twinge of guilt. Willowbrook was a small town with limited resources, and the community center had been in desperate need of repairs for years. Still, the thought of parading Thunder before a crowd of strangers, treating him like a curiosity rather than the remarkable being he was. "Let me think about it," she finally conceded. "I'll need to consult with Sarah Wilson as well. Thunder is her horse after all." After hanging up, Martha made her way outside, where Thunder greeted her with a gentle nudge of his muzzle. "Politics," she told him with a grimace. "Something I've managed to avoid for most of my life until now." Thunder's ears twitched, and he pawed at the ground once, as if expressing his own opinion on the matter. "I know," Martha agreed, interpreting his gesture. "It feels wrong to me, too. But the town could really use the help." Thunder lowered his head, bringing his eye level with Martha's. The intensity of his gaze never failed to startle her. It was as if he could see straight through to her thoughts. "What would you do?" she asked him softly. "If you could decide." For a long moment, Thunder stood perfectly still. Then, deliberately, he turned and walked several paces toward the forest, stopping to look back at Martha expectantly. She chuckled. "Escape to the woods and avoid it all? I must say I'm tempted to follow your lead." As Martha contemplated the mayor's request throughout the day, she found herself increasingly troubled by the implications. It wasn't just about a simple ceremony anymore. It was about how Thunder was being perceived, not as a sentient being worthy of respect, but as a curiosity, a novelty to be exploited. By evening, when Sarah called to discuss the mayor's proposal, Martha had made up her mind. "I don't think we should do it," she told Sarah firmly. "It feels disrespectful somehow, to Thunder, and to what happened between us." To Martha's relief, Sarah agreed immediately. "I've been thinking the same thing. Mike and I have already turned down 3 offers for interviews and 1 for a children's book deal. It doesn't feel right to commercialize something so, I don't know, sacred almost." "Sacred," Martha repeated, the word resonating deeply. "Yes, that's exactly it. What happened in those woods was private and profound, not entertainment." After they hung up, Martha sat on her porch steps, Thunder resting beside her in the cool evening air. The media vans had made another pass by her property earlier, but had eventually given up and left. "Sacred," she murmured, stroking Thunder's neck. "I've lived 78 years without witnessing a miracle. And then you came along." Thunder leaned slightly against her, a warm, solid presence in the gathering dusk. In that moment of quiet connection, Martha understood with complete clarity that no public ceremony could ever capture what truly existed between them. Some bonds were beyond explanation, beyond display. They could only be lived and felt in private moments just like this one. The autumn festival arrived with a crisp Saturday morning, painting Willowbrook in shades of gold and crimson. Martha had informed Mayor Billings of their decision to decline the ceremony, and though disappointed, he had accepted their choice with relative grace. The festival would proceed as it always had, with apple bobbing, pie contests, and local musicians playing on the gazebo stage. Martha, however, found herself restless. After nearly 2 weeks of being sequestered in her cottage to avoid the occasional reporter or curious visitor, she longed for fresh scenery. Her ankle had healed well enough for longer walks, and she missed her beloved forest paths. "What do you think, Thunder?" she asked as she sipped her morning tea on the porch. "Should we risk a little adventure today, while everyone's busy at the festival?" Thunder, who had been watching a squirrel bury acorns near the edge of the yard, turned to regard her with interest. His ears perked forward, and he came to stand by the porch steps. "I'll take that as a yes," Martha chuckled. "But we'll need to be clever about it. No main paths, no places where we might be spotted." She spent the morning planning their excursion, selecting a rarely used trail that wound deep into the forest, far from the usual hiking routes. By noon, with the sun high overhead and most of Willowbrook's residents gathered in the town square for the festival, Martha packed a small bag with water, a few sandwiches, and her ever-present sketchbook. "Ready for an adventure?" she asked Thunder as she emerged from the cottage. The horse snorted enthusiastically, pawing once at the ground. Martha approached him with her slight limp, wondering if she could manage to mount without assistance. As if reading her thoughts, Thunder moved to position himself beside the porch steps, allowing Martha to use the elevated platform as a mounting block. "You really do understand, don't you?" Martha marveled, carefully climbing onto his bare back. She hadn't ridden a horse in decades, but Thunder stood perfectly still, allowing her to settle herself before moving. Once Martha was secure, gripping his mane for balance, Thunder began walking at a gentle pace toward the forest edge. His gait was smooth and deliberate, clearly adapted to accommodate his elderly rider. They entered the forest under a canopy of autumn leaves, sunlight filtering through in dappled patterns that shifted with the breeze. Martha felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was what she had missed, the sacred silence of the woods, broken only by birdsong and the soft thud of Thunder's hooves on the leaf-strewn path. "This reminds me of when I was a girl," Martha told Thunder as they ventured deeper into the forest. "My father taught me to ride on an old pony named Butterscotch. He was nothing like you, stubborn as the day is long and twice as contrary. But I loved him dearly." Thunder's ears flicked back, listening to her voice as she shared memories that had remained dormant for decades. It felt natural somehow to confide in this extraordinary animal who seemed to absorb her words with genuine interest. They traveled for nearly an hour, following the narrow trail as it wound around ancient trees and across small, bubbling streams. Eventually, they reached a secluded clearing that Martha had almost forgotten existed, a peaceful haven ringed by towering pines, with a small spring-fed pond at its center. "Perfect," Martha sighed as Thunder came to a stop. "No reporters, no well-meaning neighbors, no one to disturb us." With Thunder's patient assistance, Martha dismounted and spread her jacket on a sun-warmed rock beside the pond. The horse meandered to the water's edge, drinking deeply before raising his head to survey their surroundings. Martha unwrapped a sandwich and watched Thunder explore the clearing, his movements graceful and deliberate. There was something almost meditative about his presence, a calm awareness that Martha found deeply soothing. "You know," she said between bites, "I've been thinking about why your rescue affected me so profoundly. It's not just that you saved my life, though I'm eternally grateful for that." Thunder paused his exploration and turned to regard her, his ears forward attentively. "It's that you reminded me of something I'd forgotten," Martha continued. "That true connection, the kind that transcends ordinary understanding, is still possible, even at my age, even when I thought I'd experienced everything life had to offer." The horse approached and settled beside her rock, close enough that Martha could rest her hand on his neck. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gentle sounds of the forest around them. Eventually, Martha retrieved her sketchbook and began to draw, capturing Thunder's noble profile against the backdrop of pines and water. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, tracing the lines of his face, the intelligent gleam in his eye that had first captivated her. "I wonder what you see when you look at the world," she mused, adding shading to her sketch. "What you understand that escapes the rest of us." Thunder's gaze met hers briefly before returning to his vigilant watch over the clearing. In that fleeting moment of eye contact, Martha felt a depth of understanding that defied rational explanation, a wordless communion between two beings who had somehow breached the barriers of species and language. The afternoon passed in peaceful solitude, the sun arcing across the sky and beginning its descent toward the horizon. Martha had completed several sketches and was feeling pleasantly tired when Thunder suddenly stiffened, his head rising sharply as his nostrils flared. "What is it?" Martha asked, instantly alert to the change in his demeanor. Thunder's attention was fixed on the far side of the clearing, his ears pricked forward intently. Martha followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual among the trees. Then she heard it, a low rumble, barely perceptible at first but growing steadily louder. It took her a moment to identify the sound. Engines, multiple vehicles by the sound of it, moving slowly but deliberately through the forest. "How on earth?" Martha began, bewildered. The trail they had followed was barely visible in places, certainly not passable by car. Thunder moved to stand protectively near Martha, his body tense with alertness. The sound grew closer, accompanied now by the crack of branches and the crunch of tires on underbrush. They must have followed our tracks, Martha realized with dismay. But how did they know we'd left the cottage? The answer came moments later as the first vehicle emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, not from the direction of the trail they had taken, but from another approach entirely. It was a rugged off-road vehicle with oversized tires, followed by two more similar vehicles. The lead SUV bore the logo of a national television network. "They've been watching the cottage," Martha said, her heart sinking, "waiting for us to leave, and now they've cornered us in what should have been our sanctuary." Thunder snorted, pawing at the ground with obvious agitation. Martha felt a surge of indignation rising within her. This intrusion, this violation of their privacy and peace, was the final straw. "Well," she said, rising to her feet with as much dignity as her tired old bones would allow, "I think it's time we had a frank conversation about boundaries, don't you?" The lead vehicle came to a stop at the edge of the clearing, its engine idling as the doors opened. A woman emerged first, smartly dressed in a blazer, despite the forest setting, with a microphone already in hand. Behind her, a man with a camera balanced on his shoulder scrambled to position himself for the perfect shot. "Mrs. Harrington!" the woman called, her voice carrying across the tranquil pond with jarring enthusiasm. "Diane Powell, Good Morning America, we've been hoping to speak with you." Martha stood her ground, one hand resting on Thunder's neck. The horse remained beside her, his body tense but controlled, his eyes fixed on the intruders. "This is private property," Martha called back, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'd appreciate it if you would leave." The reporter seemed unfazed, her professional smile never wavering as she began walking around the pond toward Martha. "We won't take much of your time, Mrs. Harrington. America is fascinated by your incredible story of survival and the remarkable bond you formed with Thunder." From the other vehicles, more people emerged. Sound technicians, producers, and additional camera operators. They began setting up equipment with practiced efficiency, as if Martha's objection had been merely a formality to be acknowledged and then ignored. Thunder shifted restlessly beside Martha, a low rumble emanating from his chest. She stroked his neck soothingly, though her own anger was building. "Ms. Powell," Martha said, her voice taking on the firm tone she had once used with unruly students during her teaching days. "I have declined all interviews for a reason. What happened between Thunder and me is personal. It's not entertainment." The reporter had reached them now, her camera crew following closely. "But surely you understand the public's interest. A horse that somehow knew you were in danger, that figured out how to rescue you. It's an incredible story of animal intelligence and compassion." "Yes, it is," Martha agreed, "and it's ours. Not yours, not your viewers. Ours." The cameraman was circling around, trying to capture footage of Thunder, who swung his head to keep the man in view, ears flattened against his head in clear displeasure. "Your horse seems agitated," Diane observed, taking a cautious step back. "He's not fond of intrusions," Martha replied pointedly. "Neither am I." A man in a suit, presumably a producer, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Harrington, we're prepared to offer compensation for your time, of course, and we understand your desire for privacy. Perhaps we could film just a short segment, 5 minutes of your story, in your own words." Martha felt her patience wearing dangerously thin. "Sir, I don't know how to make this any clearer. No interviews, no segments, no cameras. This forest has been my sanctuary for 60 years, and you've violated it without permission." The producer exchanged glances with Diane, their expressions suggesting they weren't accustomed to such firm refusals. Behind them, the crew continued setting up lights and sound equipment, undeterred. Thunder suddenly moved forward, positioning himself between Martha and the television crew. The movement wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate and unmistakable in its message. The horse stood tall, his presence commanding the clearing with quiet authority. The cameraman lowered his equipment slightly. Maybe we should back up a bit." "That would be wise," Martha agreed, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "Thunder is extremely perceptive. He knows when people aren't listening." Diane Powell's professional demeanor faltered slightly. "Mrs. Harrington, we've traveled quite a distance for this story. Our viewers—" "Your viewers," Martha interrupted, "will have to be content with the facts already reported. The rest, the true meaning of what happened, isn't something that can be captured by your cameras or explained in a 5-minute segment between commercials." A tense silence fell over the clearing. Martha could see the crew members exchanging uncertain glances, their equipment half-assembled around them. Thunder remained steadfast beside her, his presence lending her a strength she might not have found alone. The producer stepped forward again, his tone conciliatory. "Perhaps we could compromise. Just a few photos. No interview necessary." Before Martha could respond, Thunder did something unexpected. He turned and gently nudged Martha's shoulder, guiding her back toward the rock where she had been sitting. Then he walked deliberately to her sketchbook, which lay open on the stone, and nosed at it pointedly. Martha looked from Thunder to her drawings and back again, a slow smile spreading across her face as understanding dawned. "Actually," she said, turning back to the bewildered television crew, "I think I might have a proposition for you." 20 minutes later, The clearing had been transformed. The television equipment remained packed away, but the crew had gathered in a loose semicircle around Martha, who sat on her rock with her sketchbook open on her lap. Thunder stood beside her, surprisingly at ease now that the cameras had been put away. "Art has always been my way of understanding the world," Martha explained, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed clearing. "When words fail, sometimes images can speak instead." She turned the sketchbook around, revealing a series of charcoal drawings, Thunder approaching the tree where she had hung suspended, the horse pulling the rope with his teeth. Martha draped across his back as he carried her to safety. Each image captured not just the events, but the emotion of those moments, the fear, the trust, the profound connection. "These are beautiful," Diane Powell said softly, her reporter's persona momentarily forgotten. "They're my truth," Martha replied, "not sensationalized, not exaggerated, just what happened as I experienced it." She turned to the final page, which showed Martha and Thunder as they were now, sitting peacefully by the pond, two beings in perfect harmony with each other and their surroundings. "This is what your cameras can't capture," Martha continued, "the silence between words, the understanding beyond language, the sacred bond that forms when one soul recognizes another, regardless of species." The clearing had gone completely still, the forest itself seeming to listen. Even the producer, who had been checking his watch impatiently, was now focused entirely on Martha and her drawings. "I won't do an interview," Martha said, closing her sketchbook gently. "But I'll give you copies of these drawings. You can use them to tell our story, as long as you respect its integrity. No embellishments, no sensational headlines about miracle horses or supernatural bonds. Just a simple story about connection and compassion." Diane and the producer exchanged glances, a silent negotiation passing between them. "And one more condition," Martha added. "A portion of any proceeds goes to the Willowbrook Community Center Restoration Fund. The town has supported Thunder and me through all this attention. It's only fair they benefit as well." "I think we can work with that," Diane said finally, extending her hand. "You have my word. We'll honor your story the way it deserves to be told." As they shook hands, Thunder nickered softly as if expressing his approval. Martha smiled, reaching up to stroke his neck. "He'll hold you to that promise," she said. "We both will." As autumn deepened into winter, life in Willowbrook gradually returned to its quiet rhythms. The media attention faded as Martha had known it would. The world moved on to newer stories, fresher miracles, leaving Martha and Thunder to find their own way forward in the wake of their unexpected celebrity. The segment that eventually aired on Good Morning America was, to Martha's surprise, remarkably faithful to the agreement they had struck in the forest clearing. Her drawings were featured prominently, with a respectful voiceover that avoided sensationalism. The story generated a considerable donation to the Willowbrook Community Center, enough to complete the long-delayed renovations and establish a small endowment for future maintenance. Thunder had returned to the Wilson farm after nearly 3 weeks with Martha. The separation had been difficult for both of them, but necessary. He belonged with the family who had raised him, with the children who adored him, with the open meadows that had been his home for 12 years. Still, their connection remained. 3 times a week, weather permitting, Martha would make the journey to the Wilson farm. Sometimes Sarah would drive her, but more often Martha would walk, her cane now more a precaution than a necessity. She would stand at the fence line, and without fail, Thunder would appear over the rise of the meadow, trotting toward her with unmistakable recognition. On a crisp December morning, with the first light snow dusting the ground, Martha made her usual visit. She carried a small bag of apple slices and a new sketchbook, eager to capture Thunder's winter coat against the pristine landscape. "There's my hero," she called as Thunder approached the fence, his breath visible in the cold air. "Ready for some company?" The horse nickered a greeting, stretching his neck over the fence to nuzzle her shoulder. Martha offered an apple slice, which he took delicately from her palm. "Sarah says you can come out with me for a while," Martha told him, unlatching the gate. "Apparently you've been watching for me since sunrise." Thunder followed her without hesitation, staying close as they walked the perimeter of the Wilson property. Martha's steps were slower in the winter chill, her joints stiff despite her layers of warm clothing, but Thunder matched her pace perfectly. "I've been thinking about fate lately," Martha said as they walked. "Whether it exists, whether it brought us together for a reason." Thunder's ears flicked toward her voice, his attention focused on her words as it always was. "I used to dismiss such notions," she continued. "Too mystical, too convenient an explanation for the random events of life. But then you found me in that forest, against all odds. You knew exactly what to do, how to help me. How does one explain that without invoking something beyond mere coincidence?" They reached a small hillock overlooking the Wilson farm and the forest beyond. Martha paused, catching her breath as she gazed at the landscape she had known all her life, now transformed by winter's touch. "I don't suppose you have any insights to share?" she asked Thunder with a small smile. The horse stood beside her, his solid presence a comfort against the winter chill. After a moment, he lowered his head to nudge gently at the sketchbook Martha carried. "Ah, you remember," she said, finding a fallen log cleared of snow where she could sit. Always the artist's most demanding critic. Martha opened the sketchbook, revealing not blank pages but completed drawings, dozens of them, all of Thunder. Thunder grazing in the meadow. Thunder carrying Lily on his back. Thunder standing sentinel in Martha's yard. Each image captured a different facet of his remarkable presence. "I've been working on something," Martha explained, turning to the final pages. "A children's book about a very special horse who saves a very foolish old woman." The last drawing showed Martha and Thunder as they were at this moment, companions sharing a winter morning, bound by an understanding that transcended words. "Sarah thinks a publisher might be interested," Martha continued, closing the book carefully. "Not for fame or fortune, but because some stories deserve to be shared. Some connections deserve to be celebrated." Thunder raised his head, looking out over the winter landscape with what Martha had come to recognize as his contemplative expression. Then he turned back to her, his deep brown eyes meeting hers with that uncanny intelligence that still gave her goosebumps. "You know," Martha said softly, "my children think I should reconsider moving to that retirement community, especially now with winter setting in. They worry about me being alone, about falling on the ice, about all the dangers that come with aging." Thunder snorted, pawing once at the snowy ground. "That's what I told them too," Martha chuckled. "I'm not alone, not really. And I'm more afraid of a life without risk than I am of falling." They stayed on the hillock until Martha's toes began to tingle with cold. As they made their way back toward the farm, Martha found herself reflecting on how profoundly her life had changed in the months since that fateful day in the forest. She had always valued her independence, her solitude, her quiet communion with nature. Those things remained precious to her. But Thunder had given her something equally valuable, a reminder that connection, true connection, could happen in the most unexpected ways and with the most unlikely beings. Back at the fence line, Martha gave Thunder a final apple slice and stroked his forelock gently. "I'll see you on Thursday," she promised. "We'll work on the book some more." Thunder bobbed his head, then surprised her by lightly touching his muzzle to her cheek, a gesture so gentle, so deliberate that Martha felt tears spring to her eyes despite the cold. "Yes, I know," she whispered. "I love you too, my friend." As Martha walked home through the light snow, her steps were slow but steady. The winter wind whispered through the bare branches of the forest, carrying promises of spring to come. Her cottage waited in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney where Sarah had thoughtfully lit a fire before Martha's return, At 78, Martha Harrington had long ago come to terms with the approaching end of her journey. She had made peace with aging, with the gradual diminishing of physical capacities, with the knowledge that more of her life lay behind her than ahead. But thunder had reminded her that life could still surprise, that wonder could still be found in the ordinary days of an extraordinary world. That connection, profound, mysterious, sacred connection, could happen at any age, transcending the boundaries we create between species, between understanding and mystery, between what we know and what we sense but cannot prove. Martha paused at the edge of her property, looking back toward the Wilson farm where thunder had already disappeared over the rise of the meadow. The winter sun caught the snow in a million tiny diamonds of light, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to the forest, to the horse who had changed everything. "Thank you for finding me."